And here we are. I am here to talk about the Willoughbys from last year. It feels like it came out so much longer ago. So I had an interesting initial contact with this movie because I was warded away from the movie. People kept telling me, oh, that's kind of a stupid movie. Like, it's not that great. It's kind of weird and uncomfortable. And based on what I saw of the trailer, where they have an early clip of the daughter, Jane, singing a song and her voice is like heavily pitch corrected, I was just like, what? I don't care about this. And it wasn't until yesterday, Christmas Day, that I actually watched the Willoughbys for the first time. I do have some very nice things to say about it, on top of some kind of predictable negative things that are here in the mix. This is based on a book by Lois Lowry, of all people. I really like Lois Lowry. People probably know her for The Giver. Most of all, The Giver's actually part of a trilogy. The Messenger's the second one. I don't know if I ever read the third one. I really like her stuff, and apparently the first Willoughby's book was published in, it says 2008. It might be much older. But then there's another layer too, where it's sort of a play on much older chapter books for children. So it's kind of a mix of time periods and styles, but it is a modern product. And when watching it, I had the overwhelming feeling that the movie was sort of co-opting both Wes Anderson work, specifically the Royal Tenenbaums for obvious reasons, and Lemony Snicket stuff in Series of Unfortunate Events, because I still don't think we've gotten an especially good adaptation of A Series of Unfortunate Events, and it's one of my favorite series of children's chapter books kind of stuff. Although the Netflix show is all right, as I think Bo Welch did production design on that. It looks pretty cool. But here, design is everything. It has that influence, certainly from not old world, but I would say early 20th century design elements or environments. The dialogue of the Willoughby children had a pretty high chance of not really working out. I could definitely see people catching one or two scenes from this movie and not really being into it, or watching the whole movie and it's just not their thing. I was surprised by how much some of the storytelling and the dialogue did work for me. There were moments where it did feel like the Willoughby children, who are at the center of everything here, did have some kind of chemistry, that the dialogue did have a nice flow to it, and one that was unique to these characters. It's not a new structure, it's not a new type of story, really. Some of the specifics are kind of novel, and like, yeah, it has that good hook of kids are trying to kill their terrible parents. But really, all of this stuff is just kind of, I don't know, bantering about here, because the big thing with this movie, for me, is that visually, it's really fantastic. It's pretty striking, especially when you really start to look at some of the details, or you do feel immersed in the world of the movie, and that's a good thing, but at the same time, I don't think it ever feels naturalistic. It always feels very heightened. It has a high level of remove from reality, therefore it requires a higher suspension of disbelief. So I think it's a mix of the two, where I was watching this movie and I was like, okay, the world is very consistent in its visuals, art direction is just spot on, incredibly solid throughout. But on top of that, I don't know, I just kept noticing these little details, and of course nothing is ever really at right angles, which I guess is kind of an element of German expressionism. This is where I really wish I had better chops for the history of visual art and all this kind of stuff, or even graphic design. And that's another thing, is that if I knew more about the visual arts, I would be able to say more definitively whether it seems like the art direction was influenced more by specific art movements of the early 20th century or graphic design of the early to mid 20th century, because that's, I don't know, I do get that sense. There are moments where it feels more graphic designy to me and more like illustration than taking influence directly from fine arts. They have a wonderful sense of playing with scale in this movie. You'll have a lot of negative space, or you'll see, massive buildings or set pieces where the characters are just in the tiniest sliver at the bottom of the frame, and everything else is just scale and intimidation. Incredibly bold design, basically. I tried to look up some crew people that I wanted to point out. Our DP is a guy called Sebastian Brodin. Mark Mothersbaugh does the music, which is yet another Wes Anderson connection, because obviously he's worked with Wes Anderson in a number of movies at this point. Kyle McQueen seems to be the production designer, and art director. And then it also lists Craig Kelman as uncredited character design, which is, I never understand uncredited credits. Did the dude get paid for this? Anyway, character design in particular. Oh my goodness, the parents. The parents are some of my favorite character design. Obviously, they're the bad parents, so they are, a ton of sharp angles. They're incredibly thin. They're basically just lines, especially like in profile. I think it's fantastic to see them kind of squirming around. And then meanwhile, we have our kinder, nicer characters who are much rounder, especially Maya Rudolph's character, whose name is Nanny. Oh, do they really not give her like a name? The whole candy shop thing and the candy factory thing, some of that stuff didn't really feel like it fit the rest of the story. I'm sure it's in the original book and everything, but it also just seemed like a solution to every problem. Light spoilers here, I guess. But yeah, the candy factory is where they dump an orphan baby who's one of the best characters, even though she didn't play a huge role in the story. It's where they make a giant magical fiction machine to get them to where they need to go at the end of the story. It's also their means of actually finding a good family by the end of the story. It's not the most deft and agile storytelling that we've ever seen. I'll briefly mention the voice acting. No one stood out to me as bad. Will Forte is here. He just always sounds like Will Forte. I'm not a huge fan of that. I do think this is one of Maya Rudolph's best voice acting performances in recent memory. She does a lot of work. Not every project that she chooses is a winner, let's put it that way, and that's just how it goes. But here, not only do I think she, picked a really great project to work on, but she did a great job with the role. She brings some kind of flavor and sense of contemporary speech and mannerisms to the movie, where everything else feels so old-fashioned and quirky and weird and out of place. Jane Krakowski as Mother was really fantastic. Ricky Gervais was fine as the cat narrator character, and that character definitely took some points from the Lemony Snicket narration that you'll get in those books. Otherwise, yeah, it was fine. It was okay. Some guy called Sean Cullen played the Barnabys. I'm not familiar with that guy, but good job. Good job, everybody all around, pretty much. The singing was another element. The singing is some of the music. It's a mix of modern and then influences from decades past. With a stronger vision, I think the whole movie could have pulled off some really great music supervision, some great music choices for licensed tracks that were of the era, so to speak. And then that Jane's singing, they have her just sing this one kind of melody thing that builds into a full song by the end of the movie. Voice delivery is completely modern, and in that way it feels very out of place. And like I said, there are moments where her singing is heavily pitch corrected, and then other moments where it just sounds natural. I don't understand. Is that supposed to be like a thing? The development of her singing over the course of the movie? Animation, it's doing that thing where they're chopping out frames. They don't have as many frames of movement, so it sort of looks like stop motion. They have other stuff in here that looks like physical materials. I don't think they were. I think they were digitally rendered to look like physical, real-world materials that you would put in a stop motion kind of thing. Either way, it was a great choice to have those kinds of materials here. Certainly towards the end, the story let me down. Some of the character writing felt a little iffy towards the end too, and the solution feels not only obvious but very easy. It just sort of happens and then everything's over. It's definitely not perfect, but it's far better than I was expecting based on what other people had told me about this movie. I don't see this becoming any kind of series. It's too quirky and too specific, and even the art direction is as great as I think it is. I think it would have trouble carrying mainstream appeal over the course of a series or something like that. But I think that's just about everything. Please let me know if you have any thoughts on the movie. Blah, blah, blah. Thanks for stopping by.